I don't think humans are supposed to fail tests this badly, Professor Cavere muttered, his three eyes scanning the exam paper with an expression somewhere between confusion and genuine concern. Across the desk, Adrian Locke slouched in his chair, staring at the ceiling as if waiting for it to cave in and mercifully end his suffering. "It's not that bad," Adrian said, though he knew it was. He had glanced at his own answer sheet before handing it in and could already hear his father's voice in his head, listing all the ways he had disappointed generations of Lockmen. Kelvar exhaled through his spiracles, flipping the page. "Adrian, you have rewritten the equations of motion in a way that suggests space-time folds inward on itself when travelling at sublight speeds." He paused. "You understand why this is incorrect, yes?" "Sure," Adrian lied. Kelvar turned the page again, then again. Each flip sounded heavier than the last. He reached the last problem and rubbed his mandibles together. This one is remarkable in its failure." Adrian sat up. "That bad? You appear to have disproven the very foundation of the Institute's understanding of inertial mass." "Disproven?" Adrian blinked. "I don't even know how to do that correctly." Kelvar tapped one of Adrian's answers with his clawed finger. "Yes, precisely my concern. Your derivation suggests that mass is not an intrinsic property, but rather a function of spatial topology in relation to its velocity within a gravitational gradient. In simpler terms, according to your equations, matter behaves differently depending on how the surrounding universe perceives its motion." Adrian stared at him. "That's not how it works." "Absolutely not." There was a long silence. "So, does that mean I failed?" Kelvar slowly placed the exam down, rubbing his temples. "That depends. If this is wrong, it is the worst performance I have seen in 20 years of academia. If it is not wrong, then—" The door slid open and a voice cut through the tension. "Professor Kelvar." A tall, broad-shouldered figure entered, his uniform crisp, his face stern. Adrian recognized him instantly. Director Veyor of the Astrophysics Division, a man rarely seen outside classified research labs. Kelvar straightened. Director Veyor's gaze fell on the exam paper. "Is this the human's work?" Kelvar nodded. "It is unconventional." Veyor lifted the paper, scanning Adrian's supposed errors. His eyes narrowed as he reached the last page. His mandibles twitched. Then he turned and fixed Adrian with a stare that felt less like an evaluation and more like the universe itself was checking if he was real. Adrian felt his stomach drop. "Look, if you need me to retake the exam, I can—" "You derived this solution by accident?" Veyor interrupted. "I mean, I was mostly guessing." Veyor turned back to Kelvar. "Run this through the core model. If his derivation holds, I want a full analysis." Kelvar hesitated. "Sir, with all due respect, this is a failed exam." Kelvar sighed, then tapped a command into his terminal and uploaded Adrian's work into the university's computational core. The holographic display flickered as the system processed the equations, cross-referencing them against known physics models. At first, the simulation held steady. Then something happened that made Kelvar's mandibles twitch. The model didn't break. It shifted. The system adjusted the fundamental equations that had governed physics for centuries, realigning its calculations. A projection emerged, new trajectories, energy distributions, mass fluctuations. Carr's hands froze over the controls. Veyor's expression remained unreadable. Adrian leaned forward. "So, did I pass?" No one answered. After several minutes, Kelvar cleared his throat. "Director, this suggests that our standard model is incomplete." "Incomplete?" Veyor's voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. "Explain." Kelvar pointed to the data. His equation suggests that mass behaves as a relational variable, not a fixed constant. In environments of extreme velocity or gravity, objects may possess negative inertia relative to an observer's frame of reference. Adrian scratched his head. That sounds important. Kelvar turned to face him. If correct, it is more than important. It is a paradigm shift. Veyor shut the terminal off and straightened. This does not leave this room. Adrian blinked. Wait, am I in trouble? Kelvar turned to him, his mandibles clicking. No, Adrian, you may have just rewritten the laws of physics. Adrian sat in the back of the armoured transport, hands folded in his lap, watching the planet's surface blur past through the reinforced window. Across from him, Director Veyor and Professor Kelvar were deep in hushed conversation, their voices too low for him to hear over the engine hum. He wasn't sure if that was on purpose. So, Adrian finally spoke up. Where exactly are we going? Veyor's gaze flicked to him. Classified facility. Your equations need verification under controlled conditions. Verification? Adrian raised an eyebrow. I'm telling you that was just a bad test day. Kelvar shook his head. We cannot assume that. Adrian sighed. Well, maybe you should. I don't know anything about experimental physics. I don't even like physics. Veyor's expression didn't change. That makes this all the more concerning. The transport slowed, descending into a heavily fortified compound surrounded by towering metal walls. Security drones hovered along the perimeter, scanning everything with cold efficiency. Adrian had seen military bases before, but this felt different. Too clean, too quiet. Like a place where mistakes weren't just corrected, but erased. As the transport settled, Veyor gestured for him to follow. Adrian stepped out into the facility, feeling the weight of the place pressing down on him. Scientists and analysts moved in coordinated precision, their gazes flicking toward him with silent curiosity before returning to their work. A massive observation window stretched across one side of the corridor, overlooking what looked like an experimental testing chamber. Inside, advanced machinery surrounded a sleek metallic ring, suspended in mid-air, humming with latent energy. What's that? Adrian asked. Kelvar glanced at him. A controlled inertia field generator, the most precise instrument we have for measuring mass fluctuation under extreme conditions. Adrian blinked. You built a machine just to test my failed exam. Veyor's expression remained unreadable. We had it long before you, but your equations suggest a new application, one we had not considered. A group of engineers hurried past, carrying high-density shielding plates toward the chamber. Adrian watched them go, his stomach tightening. Is there a reason they look like they're expecting an explosion? Kelvar hesitated. Your calculations imply a theoretical instability in mass-energy relationships. If correct, the results could be unpredictable. Unpredictable, Adrian exhaled. And you still think this is a good idea? Veyor turned to him. That is why you are here. Adrian gave him a skeptical look. I feel like I should have brought a helmet. Kelvar handed him a reinforced data pad. We need you to verify the initial conditions before the test begins. Adrian glanced at the equations on the screen. Half of it might as well have been ancient runes. You realize I don't actually understand what I wrote, right? Kelvar clicked his mandibles. Do your best. With a sigh, Adrian scanned the numbers, correcting the only things that looked obviously wrong. Probably. Maybe. He wasn't sure. Either way, Kelvar took the datapad and entered the new parameters into the system. A warning klaxon blared and the observation deck lights dimmed. The inertia field generator pulsed with energy, and Adrian felt an odd sensation, like the room itself had momentarily shrunk and then expanded again. The ring inside the chamber flickered, its edges distorting, warping space around it. Then something happened that made every scientist in the room freeze. The mass scanner readout began fluctuating. Adrian frowned. That's not normal, is it? Kelvar was too focused on the numbers to answer. Veor leaned forward. Increase power by 5%. The engineers hesitated, but complied. The fluctuation stabilized, but now the mass reading showed something impossible. The ring was oscillating between positive and negative mass states. Kelvar whispered, This shouldn't be happening. Adrian wasn't sure what was worse, the fact that something was clearly going wrong, or the fact that everyone in the room was more fascinated than alarmed. Veor turned to the engineers. Initiate phase distortion analysis. Before they could, the ring's oscillations intensified. The air inside the chamber bent, light distorting as if reality itself was struggling to stay in place. Then, with a sharp pulse, the distortion collapsed inward. The entire facility seemed to lurch, and for a brief second Adrian felt weightless, not floating, but as if gravity itself had briefly forgotten he existed. Then, just as quickly, everything snapped back. The distortion was gone. The ring sat motionless in the chamber. The readout stabilized. Silence filled the room. Veor turned slowly to Kelvar. Results? Kelvar stared at the data. The equations held. Adrian looked between them. So, does that mean I accidentally created a black hole? Kelvar exhaled. Number? But you did something far stranger. Adrian rubbed his face. That's not a comforting answer. Veor turned back to the chamber, his expression unreadable. Repeat the test. Adrian sat stiffly in his chair as the facility buzzed with activity. The previous test had left everyone shaken but eager. Everyone except him. I don't know about you guys, he muttered, but I'd consider not messing with the laws of physics any further. Veor ignored him. Begin phase alignment. Inside the chamber, the metallic ring flickered with an unnatural glow. The energy field pulsed at steady intervals, warping space in ways Adrian didn't have the vocabulary to describe. He was pretty sure it looked wrong in ways he wasn't meant to understand. Kelvar was glued to the monitor. Mass inversion is holding stable. Field integrity at 99%. Adrian looked around. So, what exactly is the goal here? You're all acting like this was the plan the whole time. Kelvar didn't turn away from the reading. We are on the threshold of experimental physics. Your equations imply that mass may behave relationally, which means if we manipulate the conditions precisely, we may achieve... The ring pulsed. Space inside the chamber twisted like a funhouse mirror. Then, for an instant, everything in the room felt lighter, less real. Adrian grabbed the desk. Okay, I felt that. That's bad, right? Kelvar's mandibles twitched. Potentially, Veor's voice was steady. Increase power by 2%. The engineers hesitated but complied. The distortion grew, but instead of collapsing like before, it stabilized. Carr's eyes widened. It's holding. Adrian raised a hand. And what exactly is it? Kelvar turned to him, his expression unreadable. You may have accidentally proven that mass itself is a construct of spatial topology. Adrian rubbed his temple. Great, that clears up nothing. Kelvar exhaled. What I mean is, your equations suggest mass is not fundamental. It is assigned by the universe depending on local conditions. We are seeing that play out in real time. Adrian stared at the twisting field inside the chamber. So, what if you push it too far? Things stop having mass? What happens then? Veor's voice was calm. That is what we are about to find out. Before Adrian could protest, the test chamber shuddered. The ring flared, then dimmed. The space inside it folded, creating something that felt like a hole in reality, even though it didn't collapse like one. Then came the strangest moment yet. The mass scanner read 0. Not near 0. Not an approximation. The ring was there. It was visible, but it no longer registered as having mass. The silence in the room was thick. Carr's voice was barely above a whisper. "We've done it." Adrian frowned. "Done what?" Kelvar turned to him. "We've just proven that mass can be negated under the right conditions. The implications of this are beyond comprehension." Adrian squinted at the chamber. "You're saying you made an object massless. What does that even mean?" Kelvar gestured at the floating ring. "It means we have created something that should not be possible. Mass is a limitation of normal physics. Without it—" He paused. "Inertia, gravity, everything changes." Vor's voice was sharp. "Lower the field before we lose stability." The engineers quickly shut down the test. The distortion in the chamber flickered and faded. The ring settled back into normal space, and the mass scanner resumed its standard readings. Adrian let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. "So you're telling me my exam, my terrible exam, somehow led to this?" Kelvar nodded. "Yes." Adrian ran a hand down his face. "I can't decide if that's incredible or terrifying." Villor turned to him. "It's both." Kelvar was already recording notes. "This changes everything. Mass is no longer a fundamental property. It can be altered. That means inertia control, gravity manipulation, perhaps even true reactionless propulsion." Adrian frowned. "Wait, are you saying—" Carr's mandibles twitched in excitement. "Yes, starships." Adrian blinked. "Wait, hold on." Villor turned back to the engineers. "Prepare the next test. We move to controlled mass fluctuations at scale." Adrian stood up. "Okay, look, I just failed an exam. I didn't mean to rewrite all of physics. You guys are acting like this is the greatest discovery in history." Kelvar and Villor stared at him. "It is," Kelvar said. Adrian sat back down. Villor turned to him. "We will need you to work with us. Even if you do not fully understand it, your thought process, whatever led to this, must be explored further." Adrian rubbed his temples. "I was just making things up, man." Kelvar shook his head. "Creativity in science is often mistaken for accident. There is something in how you see problems that led to this moment." Adrian groaned. "So now what?" Vor's gaze was steady. "Now we push further. This is only the beginning." Adrian sighed. "I really just wanted to pass my class." Kelvar clicked his mandibles. "You have done something much more than that." Adrian leaned back, staring at the ceiling. A failed exam. That's all this was supposed to be. Now he was sitting in a top-secret lab, watching mass itself become a variable of reality. And somehow he knew this was only the start of something far bigger. Adrian stared out of the observation deck, watching the void stretch endlessly beyond the reinforced glass. The test chamber was gone. The equations were no longer just numbers in a failed exam. Now they were engines. A decade had passed since that fateful day at the research facility. What started as an academic disaster had become a technological renaissance, one that reshaped everything humanity and its allies understood about space, time, and motion. Carr's words from that day echoed in his mind. This changes everything. They hadn't been an exaggeration. Adrian turned away from the window, stepping into the command deck of the Pioneer. The ship was sleek, compact, and unlike anything that had come before it. There were no fuel tanks, no propellant chambers, only the inertia field engine nestled at its core, a device that shouldn't exist, but did. The first reactionless drive. Humanity had been bound by physics for millennia. Rockets had always been shackled by mass, burdened by the simple truth that movement required energy. Fuel burned, propellant expelled. The old rules had been absolute. But now Adrian had helped rewrite them. Ships no longer had to follow the limitations of chemical propulsion. They didn't need gravity assists or multi-stage launches. The Pioneer was the first vessel capable of shifting its inertia at will, moving through space as if mass itself was a setting to be adjusted, not a rule to be obeyed. And today, they were going to prove it. Kelv stepped beside him, his mandibles clicking in anticipation. Everything is ready. Adrian exhaled. And the others? Watching? Kelvar gestured toward the long-range monitors. The entire observation network was tuned in. Human fleets, allied species, scientific institutions. Even the skeptics who had once laughed at Adrian's equations now waited in nervous silence. The test would be simple. The Pioneer would shift its mass to zero, apply a single vector force, and see if it could achieve what no spacecraft had before: motion without reaction. Adrian sat in the pilot's chair. He was no engineer, no scientist, just a guy who once guessed his way through an exam. And yet somehow he was sitting at the helm of the most important test flight in history. He placed his hand on the control panel. Let's get this over with. Kelv nodded, activating field. The ship vibrated as the inertia engine powered up. The numbers on the mass readout began dropping. 5%, 2%, 1%, then 0. Adrian felt it immediately, or rather, he didn't feel it. The ship no longer had weight, no inertia. He moved his arm and felt nothing resisting it. For the first time, the ship existed outside the rules of conventional motion. Applying thrust, Kelvar announced. A single pulse of energy flickered through the navigation thrusters. In theory, it should have been meaningless, like trying to push a mountain with a breath. But the ship moved. The view outside shifted. The acceleration wasn't gradual. It was immediate. The Pioneer responded instantly, obeying the simplest of forces without delay. No momentum, no lag, just motion. Adrian gripped the armrest. We're moving. Kelv stared at the data feed. We are moving. Silence stretched between them. The implications hit all at once. This was it. The old rules were dead. Space travel had just been redefined. Adrian let out a breathless laugh. So, does this mean I finally passed my exam? Kelvar turned to him. Adrian, you rewrote the exam. Beyond the command deck, beyond the observation screens, beyond the countless eyes watching this moment unfold. Humanity had just taken its first step into a universe that no longer had limits.